What I'm about to tell you is something I still go to therapy for. It happened back during the summer of 2009. I started going to therapy around the start of 2010, and I've been going ever since. It wasn't my idea, it was my parents'. In a way, the only reason I still go is to keep them from worrying themselves sick over me. Not that I don't derive some small benefit from it, but what I tell my parents, my therapist, and I talk about, and what we actually talk about are two very different things. Around the start of the holiday season back in 2008, I was a sophomore earth sciences student at UCC Davis. The university offers some summer placements to students who want to gain a little work experience. Although they're mostly dreary research assignments, I happened across one that piqued my interest in a way the others didn't. In short, I had the opportunity to spend the summer working as a fire lookout in the Trinity National Forest. It was a 3-month-long placement, but I'd be paid for my time, and completing a piece of long-term field research would look very good on my resume. I applied, I was accepted, and several months later, I was told that I'd be posted to the Tom Head Mountain Lookout, which was about 30 miles west of the city of Red Bluff and about 130 miles north of Sacramento. Since I didn't own a car back then, I had to catch a bus all the way up to Red Bluff. From there, I hitchhiked along the 36 and then hiked up into the hills until I reached the flat-topped peak of Tom Head Mountain, where the old Fireler Lookout Tower stood. The first thing that struck me was that the 20-foot-tall lookout tower was made of wood. I figured a fire lookout tower would have been built with less flammable materials, but since it had been constructed back in the 30s, I guess wood was all they had at hand. It didn't make for the best first impression. After all, that tower was supposed to be my home for the next 3 months. But in the end, I managed to get myself settled in, and the place started to feel more cozy than decrepit. A big part of the assignment involved what we call numerical weather predictions, or NWEP. I won't bore you with the exact science of it, but it's somewhat similar to the kind of prediction models that allow news channels to give long-term weather forecasts. In the context of being a fire lookout, we can use these same models to predict the dry spells or heat waves that might result in a wildfire, because prevention is always better than a cure. Working on weather analysis kept me occupied for a precious few hours each day, while hydration became an important aspect of my daily routine. But outside of maintaining myself and my equipment, I had very little to keep me occupied. To kill time, I'd go for walks in the woods surrounding the lookout tower. Sometimes I'd visit the abandoned miner's cabin, sometimes the old campground that lay just beyond it. I'd keep my bear spray with me, just in case I had any close encounters of the fur kind. Haha, but I never saw any people around. At first, the seclusion was a welcome escape from the hustle and bustle of the big city. By the end of the first week, my social battery had been thoroughly recharged. But by the end of week 2, once the boredom had really started to set in, I found myself pining for human contact in a way that was very much surprising to me. I had my old Samsung cell phone with me, along with a very efficient solar-powered charger, but the lack of solid coverage meant it was more useful as a paperweight. If I walked up to this one spot on the ridgeline, I could manage to squeeze the odd text message through, but any sort of phone call was out of the question, and that was something I hadn't anticipated. It sounds foolish to think about it now, but I figured that since I was so high up on a mountain, getting decent cell reception wouldn't be an issue. In reality, it was all about proximity to towers. Communicating through the odd text message was all well and good, but by the end of that first month, being the only living soul for miles really started to grind on me. When a Trinity Forest Ranger showed up with my second month's supplies, I was so happy to see her that I almost hugged her when she stepped out of her 4x4. She could tell how happy I was to see her and joked about me going a little stir-crazy up there all on my lonesome. She was nice enough to stay a while and drink some of my bad coffee. Then, once I'd hauled my supplies from her trunk, she drove off into the sunset. After that, knowing I wouldn't see another person in the flesh for a whole month actually made me kind of emotional. You don't realize what social animals we are until you really cut yourself off from other people. I once read that in prison, solitary confinement is one of the cruelest punishments. By the second month, I'd be out on one of my regular walks and see something move out of the corner of my eye. But then, when I turned to look, nothing. There's a lot of wildlife out there in Trinity, so for the first half dozen times it happened, I figured it was just a fox or a raccoon skittering away from me, frightened. But then after a while, the shadows in the corners of my eyes started getting larger and clearer, until eventually they weren't just in my peripheries anymore. I'd see something moving in the trees up ahead of me, too big to be a bobcat or mountain lion, the wrong shape to be an elk or deer. I'd stop, look, listen, but nothing ever moved, nothing ever stirred. By the time I started to call out, "Hello?" into the empty woods ahead of me, I had developed a genuine concern for my own psychological well-being. I tried a dozen different things to lessen the feelings of loneliness and isolation, and although talking to myself might make it sound like I'd lost my mind, I can assure you that it helped. Pouring my thoughts out onto this page helped too, as did singing my favorite songs. After a day or two of accentuating the positives and eliminating the negatives, I began to feel considerably better. But then came the day when, as I set off on one of my routine walks through the woods, I caught a glimpse of a human figure standing among the trees. I turned my head to look in their direction, and like all the other things I'd seen moving in the corner of my eyes, this person didn't dart off among the trees. Quite the opposite, in fact. They remained as still as a statue, limbs very rigid, completely unmoving. In all honesty, the person's sudden presence scared the crap out of me, and the odd, unnatural way that they were standing did not help either. But then, the more I stared at this mysterious figure, the more I realized that it wasn't a person at all. I took a few steps toward it, consumed with curiosity, only to discover that what I was looking at was some kind of wooden effigy. Someone had constructed a sort of skeleton out of wooden planks. Then, after attaching what looked to be chicken wire as a skull and rib cage, they had stuffed the cavities with a variety of dead roots and leaves. I remember being almost mesmerized by it, not because it exuded any kind of eldritch power or anything crazy like that, but because it was so exquisitely constructed. I remained in this sort of blissful state of thoughtlessness until a rather alarming thought occurred to me. That effigy had been staked into the earth less than a football field away from the lookout tower, and it almost certainly hadn't been there the previous day. That meant that someone had walked all the way up Tom Head Mountain in the middle of the night, after putting a ton of work into their conscious art installation, only to stake it just meters away from where I was laying my head each night. I could think of a dozen innocent reasons why someone might do such a thing, but still, there was something about the effigy's presence that just didn't sit right with me. This probably sounds incredibly juvenile to some, but as I stood there, face to wooden face with the mysterious effigy, I was suddenly filled with the overwhelming urge to knock it over. I didn't like the idea of going about my business with this twig man just standing there, looking all creepy like he was. It's never something I'd do now, but I obviously can't speak for the much younger, college-age me, who raised a hand, reached out, and prepared to knock the thing off its little stubby feet. But I also remember this feeling of intense hesitation as I reached out to touch it, how it almost felt like I was desecrating some sacred sculpture. The sensation halted me for 1 second, but in the next, it felt like a challenge. Then, with one heavy stone, I sent the effigy falling back into the dirt with a little dry thud. In the moments that followed, I felt the hairs on my arms standing on end as I was struck by the sudden cognizance that whoever planted that twig man might still actually be close by. I looked around, then over both shoulders, making sure the coast was clear. I don't believe in any kind of sixth sense, but if there ever was a time in my life when I felt like I was being watched, it was then. I decided not to finish my walk that day and headed back to the tower to make sure that I had that second can of bear mace handy. I wouldn't say that I was scared, more apprehensive of what the effigy's sudden presence might actually mean. I later considered the possibility that some renegade artist with a penchant for hiking might have mocked that thing up on the fly. At first, I had this irrational image in my head of some unhinged redneck hauling the completed effigy up the mountain like a character from an unwritten Thomas Harris novel. But the alternative, that it was a spur-of-the-moment creative thing, was a considerably less unnerving explanation. No one had put that thing there to spook me. They probably didn't even know that I was in the area to begin with. The more I thought about that, the more I felt strangely guilty for having shoved it over. The next morning, I decided to head out on one of my morning routines, and while I was at it, I'd stake that twig man back into the earth and just leave him upright, just as I'd found him. I completed that morning routine, jotted down a few early morning weather observations, and then set off in the direction of Tom Head Springs with some soap and a washcloth. When I reached the spot where the twig man had been lying in the dirt, I was startled to find him standing upright again. Someone had returned, possibly in the middle of the night, and had returned that twig man to his vertical position again. I wasn't outright frightened by this, just more unnerved. I also figured that if it was me who made the twig man, this silent companion I could go visit on hikes so often, I'd also be kind of bummed if some jerk came along and just pushed him over. Besides, if he was someone else's silent but stoic companion, maybe he could be mine too. I gave myself a scrub down at the springs, made my way back to the lookout, passing the twig man as I went, and then spent the rest of the day making weather observations and reading the books that I had brought with me. Then, once the sun went down and my very early bedtime approached, I climbed into my sleeping bag and attempted to catch some shut-eye. I think I might have just been on the cusp of drifting off when a deeply alarming scent began to drift into my nostrils. It was the smell of smoke. I leapt out of my sleeping bag, threw on my shorts and boots, and was about to radio the ranger office over in Ridding when a flicker of flame in the woods below caught my eye. The fire was close, very close, and by the look of things, it was still small enough for me to fight. I grabbed the tower's small fire extinguisher, rushed down the stairs, and then bolted toward the source of the fire. If I could put it out right then and there, I'd not only save the state of California hundreds of thousands of dollars, but I'd also save acres upon acres of protected forest. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, and then when I saw what was burning, I experienced one of the strangest sensations of my entire life. It was the twig man. That's what was burning, and although I carried on hurtling toward it, I'd never seen anything so repellent in all my life. The desire to put the damn thing out and prevent a potentially massive forest fire kept propelling me through the woods. But upon considering the dual questions of who set the twig man on fire to begin with and why, that was the first moment I felt fear. After putting out the fire, I got to thinking about who or what might be to blame. I couldn't rule out vandalism as the motive, but even the most thoughtless of vandals would think twice before setting a wildfire in a national forest. I also couldn't rule out the possibility that the person who had set the twig man on fire was the same person who put him there in the first place. I doubted very much that someone who had taken the time to create such a sculpture would also be willing to burn the entire forest down. The very nature of the twig man suggested its creator felt a reverence for nature, not a contempt for it. But in turn, that raised another question. What if Twig Man's creator set him on fire because they knew I'd come running to put it out? Since I was just a few days from my second and final resupply, The same ranger who had visited me the previous month decided to head up to the mountain a little early, both to drop off my supplies and check out the remains of the Twig Man. When she got there and I walked her out into the woods, there wasn't much left of him to look at, but the sight of him provoked a very familiar reaction from the ranger. She had all the same questions I did, but all that mattered was that I had dealt with the fire both quickly and professionally. In her words, I should have been very proud of myself. For the next few days, I felt perfectly content to be alone. It was like the fire and the praise I'd gotten for my decisive action had topped up my social gas tank, so to speak, satisfying that crucial third layer in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When I went on my regular walks, I didn't see any shadows moving in the corners of my eyes. I wasn't overcome by that creeping feeling that I was being watched. I felt at peace, both within and without. And that was the start of my third and final month up on the mountain. But towards the end of it, that same dread-inducing feeling that I was losing my mind returned with a vengeance. Having finished all the books that I had brought with me, and having grown sick of journaling my own pressingly repetitive stream of consciousness, I was more plagued by tedium than ever. On the surface, this seemed to lead to a drastic decline in my mental health. I started seeing things again, like people moving in the woods, and the encroaching sense of paranoia resulted in a handful of completely sleepless nights. The exhaustion exacerbated every other symptom, until at one stage, I started to wonder if I could complete the full 3-month term. I tried as best I could to power through, taking things one day and one night at a time, until finally I had just 7 more nights to go. I tried to mark the occasion with a minor celebration and opened up a can of warm soda that I had been saving for a very metaphorical rainy day. Then, after an evening spent trying to keep my spirits high, I settled down to sleep. 1 down, 6 to go, I told myself, but I couldn't have been more wrong. Hours later, maybe around 1 or 2 in the morning, I opened my eyes and heard what sounded like something moving among the trees below my tower. It was a very heavy sound, like something large and bipedal was stomping through the underbrush. Seeing as that was a zoological impossibility, I decided to climb out of my sleeping bag and go take a look. Having picked up my flashlight on the way out, I aimed its beam down into the darkness below me, and in an instant I saw them. To my horrified astonishment, I discovered that the tower I was in was surrounded by at least a dozen hooded figures. Beneath me, just out of sight at the base of the tower, was the source of the noise that I'd been hearing. As alarming as the encounter was, I didn't immediately understand the significance of the stranger's presence. There was always the possibility that they were simply a group of late-night hikers who happened across the tower and were merely curious. But when I called out to them and asked them to identify themselves, I didn't hear a word in reply. I took a few steps out and then headed down the stairs a little so I could see what was occurring at the base of the tower, which, if you remember, was only around 10 to 15 feet down. More hooded figures stood below me, and the sound they were making came from the fact that they were stacking large bales of twigs underneath the tower. It was kindling. They were going to set the tower on fire, with me inside it. The first thing I thought to do was rush back into the cabin to report what was happening via my radio. While I was doing that, I threw on my clothes and boots, grabbed my flashlight and my survival knife, then walked out onto the balcony, just in time for the fire to start. I didn't waste a second. I ran along to where the stairs were, then went down 2 or 3 flights so that the fall wouldn't break my legs. I figured I'd have to jump, as whoever was surrounding the lookout would probably be expecting me to head down the stairs once they set fire to it, since they seemed perfectly content to roast me alive in what amounted to a very serious crime. I figured that they wouldn't be too excited about me escaping the scene. I remember jumping, knocking the wind out of myself, then being almost certain that I had just sprained an ankle until I put weight on it. Somehow I was fine, And I also took the nearest hooded figure by surprise, which in turn gave me this brief but golden opportunity to slip past him. If I moved at speed, I honestly thought that I was about to get shot or stabbed or worse. I guess the person I ran at nearly did get me with something, but it was a stun gun. As I ran past them, they lunged at me, and I saw this little tiny bolt of lightning dancing in the air for a split second before I slipped past them and made my escape. I remember hearing a furious scream from someone, screaming about me getting away, but by then I was long gone, half running and half sliding down the mountain as fast as I could in complete darkness. I was lucky not to fall and accidentally off myself, but there was no catching me. I made it all the way down the mountain without seeing so much as a flashlight behind me. I ran and ran until I was too tired to run anymore. Then, after what seemed like hours upon hours of rummaging through the brush, I came across a little place calling itself the Rocky Ridge Hunting Club, along with a small group of hunters preparing to take advantage of the dawn's calm. By that point, the sky was light enough that I could point out the plume of smoke rising from Tomad Mountain, and within the hour, choppers were making passes over the lookout, creating artificial rain, while the ground-based fire crews rushed to the scene. I should have felt exhausted. I should have been dead on my feet. But when I saw that first chopper fly over us, heading in the direction of Tom Head, I felt 10 feet tall. I'd made it to that hunting club just in time to avert a major ecological disaster, and I felt like a hero. But I was not treated like one. Even after I explained everything that had happened, with the twig man, the hooded figures, and the fires, it was me who got the blame for burning down the Tom Head Mountain lookout. According to the fire crews, there was no evidence of an accelerant being used, but it was impossible to tell if the source of the fire had been inside or outside the cabin. I guess it was my preposterous explanation that swayed the opinions of the Forest Service, because on their command, I was arrested on charges of arson, endangerment, and destruction of government property. My defense attorney told me that I dodged being charged with a serious environmental crime by the skin of my teeth, the kind that's only one step down from outright terrorism. She also told me that my best option by far was to basically plead temporary insanity at my trial. She made it out like I was some upstanding citizen who'd merely been unfortunate enough to have suffered a kind of psychiatric crisis as a result of severe and prolonged isolation. I pleaded guilty, got 100 hours of highway trash picking and a mandatory psychiatric evaluation at the behest of the state of California. I tried to get my parents to believe me, but unfortunately they took my attorney's arguments as gospel and, instead of the truth, chose to believe that I'd gone temporarily crazy. But unlike my attorney, whose interest ended once the money dried up, Mom and Dad wouldn't let it go. They hounded me until eventually I gave in and agreed to go to regular counseling sessions. I didn't want to take pills for something I knew I didn't have, so to them, therapy was the next best thing. But these days, I don't talk to my therapist about how I'm scared to lose my mind again or how it might be a symptom of a much more frightening disease. I talk to him about how painful it can be when you tell someone the absolute truth and they choose not to believe you for the sake of their own sanity. I should have known something was off when my supervisor called me in for an urgent adjustment to my usual shift. A bunch of people had recently bailed on the night schedule without much of an explanation, so it landed in my lap. At first, I wasn't exactly thrilled, but a small part of me was curious about what it would be like to watch the park after dark. I guess I figured it would be hours of quiet, broken up by the occasional hoot of an owl or the flicker of a flashlight. So there I was, hiking up the tower's endless steps with a backpack full of coffee, energy drinks, and whatever courage I thought I had. The night air tasted cool, almost damp, and my boots crunched on the gravel in a way that echoed, like I wasn't the only one listening. By the time I made it to the top, my legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to shrug it off. The tower's narrow wooden platform led me into a cramped room with 3 walls of glass and a 4th wall hosting a door. There was a rickety bed, a tiny kitchen corner with a mini fridge and a microwave, plus a desk where the radio station sat blinking. I gave the radio a test. Static popped and hissed, but Donnie's voice eventually came through, saying something about how I'd better make friends with my flashlight because the moon was barely out. That bit of chatter steadied my nerves a little. At least I wasn't alone in the world. I stepped onto the balcony to get a proper look at my surroundings. Trees stretched in nearly every direction, their tops swaying faintly in the breeze. Off to my right was the lagoon, which looked more like a giant puddle choked with algae, lily pads, and random debris. The water sat way too still for my comfort. Meanwhile, the usual nighttime orchestra kicked up. Frogs, crickets, leaves rustling. It was almost soothing. I leaned over the balcony rail, scanning the area with binoculars. At first, I spotted nothing except a few moonlit clearings and shadows that I assumed were just logs or rocks. But near one of the ridges, I caught a glimpse of something pale, a shape that stood out against the dark. It looked suspiciously like a person, maybe a kid wearing a blanket with 2 big circles where eyes might be. A ghost costume, in the middle of summer, on federal land, with no one else around. It threw me off so hard I nearly dropped the binoculars. I blinked, steadying the lenses again. The little ghost figure was still staring straight at the tower. Part of me wanted to believe it was just some leftover prank, but my gut churned in protest. I pulled out my handheld radio and called Donnie. "Hey man, you in earshot? I don't even know how to say this. There's a kid dressed like a ghost on the ridge right below the big dip in the tree line." Donnie sounded as confused as I was. "A ghost? You serious?" "As a heart attack," I muttered. "Could be some lost camper kid, or maybe a runaway. Want to check it out before it becomes our problem?" He sighed, but agreed. "Fine, I'll head that way. Keep your eyes on them and let me know if they move." I caught a flicker of Donnie's flashlight weaving through the dark beneath me. He wasn't fast, but at least he was going in the right direction. I stayed on the balcony, sweeping the binoculars around, glancing back at the ridge every few seconds. The figure didn't move at all, like it was a statue with a bedsheet draped over it. Then, just as Donnie's light got close, his flashlight went out. The beam vanished so abruptly that I thought maybe my eyes had tricked me. My radio let out a burst of static, and Donnie's voice cut off mid-sentence. In that exact same instant, the forest dropped every sound it had. Not one chirp, not one rustle. The hush felt alive, like I'd stepped into some bubble of silence. My pulse hammered in my ears, and I stumbled back into the tower, practically yanking the door off its hinges to close it. I tried calling Donnie again. Nothing but static. My flashlight spotlighted the corners of the tower's room, and everything looked normal, but my nerves were lit up. I decided to go back outside, maybe yell into the darkness a few times. That was when I noticed a shape below, next to the first flight of steps. It looked like a woman, but impossibly tall and unnaturally thin, with a soaked dress clinging to her body. Her hair dangled in wet clumps, and she seemed bent at odd angles, like someone had tried putting a puzzle together the wrong way. She wasn't just dripping, she looked swollen with water, her skin a sickly bluish color that glistened in the moonlight. She lifted her face, eyes cloudy like murky pond water, her mouth stretched open, far too wide. A sound emerged, a high-pitched gurgling way too loud to be human. My stomach flipped. Every cell in my body demanded I get the hell away from that door. I jumped back inside, locking the knob as fast as I could, though a flimsy piece of metal didn't feel like it could stop anything. The radio squawked uselessly from the desk, providing zero comfort. I stayed there, pressed against the wall, trying to catch my breath, shining my flashlight at the door in case the woman decided to break it down. I could still sense her presence outside, but I had no idea if she'd left or if she was crawling her way up to the balcony. Then, the closet door creaked open. I nearly dropped my flashlight. Instinct forced me to raise the knife I'd grabbed earlier, my heart hammering like an engine in my chest, and out stepped a little ghost. The same ragged sheet I'd seen on the ridge. That was enough to make me want to scream, but then the figure lifted it off, revealing Marvin, Donnie's son, sporting a grin so wide you'd think he'd scored the prank of the century. I felt heat flush my face. "Marvin, what the hell?" Before the kid could answer, another voice crackled over the radio. "There he is. How'd he do, Marv? He freak out?" Recognizing Donnie's voice, I stomped across the room and grabbed the radio. "You set me up," I yelled, so furious my voice went ragged. "Hiding your kid in my tower, dressing him like some cheap little ghost?" Donnie and his other son, Joey, started howling with laughter. Apparently, they'd been planning this for days. Snuck Marvin in here before my shift, made a show of him standing on the ridge, cut the power to Donnie's flashlight at the perfect moment. I'm sure they expected me to lose it. Mission accomplished. "Relax," Donnie cackled. "It was just some harmless fun, man. Thought we'd welcome you to the graveyard shift in style. How's your blood pressure?" I felt relief and anger crash together like thunderclouds in my gut. But then, "What about that thing outside?" I choked out. Silence. Then Donnie let out a short laugh, one that sounded less certain. "Wait, slow down. You think I hired an extra for your personal horror movie?" He chuckled. "We only planned the ghost kid. That's it. No ladies in sight." His words hit me like a punch to the ribs. Even if they'd orchestrated a bunch of details to fool me, that shrieking creature I'd seen was way beyond a backyard prank. I couldn't shake the memory of that stretched skin. I had the insane urge to fling open the tower door just to see if she was still out there, but the possibility kept me rooted in place. Marvin must have seen the alarm still etched on my face because his grin faltered. Dad?" he said softly into his own walkie. "What if someone else is out here?" The question hung in the air, heavy as lead. After a moment, Donnie tried to keep it light. "Look, maybe you saw a deer, or your eyes played tricks on you. It's late, and you're wound up. We'll swing by once we finish up. Sound good?" I clicked off the radio without answering. My anger was draining, replaced by an old, deep fear that stuck to my thoughts like tar. Part of me wanted to chase Marvin out with a scolding, but a stronger part, maybe the protective side, wouldn't risk letting him leave alone until this thing was explained or gone. I had zero trust in that black stretch of forest. I paced the tower, double-checking windows and fiddling with the lock on the door. It felt so thin, like a stiff wind could knock it down. Meanwhile, the night outside remained too quiet for comfort. Marvin looked just as jumpy as me now, hugging his arms close to his body like the joke wasn't so funny anymore. Time crawled. Every so often I'd catch a glimpse of movement outside, a branch shifting or a swirl of mist over the lagoon, but I never saw that gaunt figure again. It was almost worse, not knowing if it was still lurking beneath the tower. At one point, a faint screech echoed from somewhere in the woods, and I nearly tripped over my own feet, spinning around to face the door. Marvin squeaked, then tried to laugh it off, but his eyes were wide. By the time the first streaks of dawn arrived, I felt shredded. My chest was tight, my muscles stiff from clenching. Donnie came through on the walkie once more to say something about making the rounds, but I barely registered it. All I could think was that if I had to do another shift here, locked in this fishbowl, I'd lose my mind. Jokes were one thing, but that woman's milky gaze was not something you faked with store-bought makeup. I couldn't explain it, and Donnie wouldn't listen. That left me with one real choice. "All right, Marvin, time to go," I said quietly, and escorted him down the tower steps in the fragile early light. The two of us jumped at every rustle or bump. I was armed with that kitchen knife, feeling ridiculous but unable to relax. The lagoon looked almost peaceful in daylight, but I was too on edge to appreciate it. By the end of that endless descent, my mind was made up. The moment I got the chance, I'd inform the higher-ups I wasn't staying on nights. Not another hour. Let them call me paranoid. Whatever I'd seen out there, it wasn't just a trick of the dark. Something in those woods had noticed me, and I had no intention of sticking around for round two. Marvin and I trudged toward the ranger station, the first rays of sun hitting the trees in a washed-out glow. Part of me expected to see that soggy figure trailing behind us, but every time I looked over my shoulder, it was only empty space. Maybe that was even scarier. It meant it could still be anywhere. I'd always believed the night shift was nothing but quiet hours, but nothing from this point forward would ever feel normal again. When I glanced back at the tower, all I saw was a lonely shape against the morning sky and the silent, unmoving lagoon. But I remembered that scream. I remembered the hush that followed it too. And I wondered if maybe it was the woods themselves sending a warning. Some things aren't meant to be watched after dark, at least not by anyone who wants to make it home sane. I never liked the idea of working the night shift. The forest feels different when the sun goes down, darker, heavier, like it's hiding something. But I didn't have a choice tonight. Too many of the other guys quit the night shift recently, and they were short-staffed. So here I am, driving through the winding dirt roads, heading to my post at the fire tower. Normally, I work during the day when the trees look green and peaceful. At night, though, they look like tall, twisted shadows. I packed extra coffee to keep me awake and alert. It wasn't going to be easy. The fire tower is deep in the woods, far from the main road, and near this big, foggy lake. Even during the day, that lake gives me the creeps. The mist just hangs over it like something's waiting underneath, ready to crawl out when no one's looking. I try not to think about that as I park the truck and grab my gear. It's just one night, I tell myself. The climb up the fire tower feels longer than usual, maybe because the sky is already so dark. By the time I reach the top, the stars are just beginning to peek through the clouds, and everything is quiet. Too quiet. Usually I can hear crickets or owls by now, but tonight, it's just still. I drop my bag inside the small room at the top of the tower and take a deep breath. This is my space for the next 8 hours, a tiny room with windows on all sides, overlooking a sea of trees. I've always loved this view during the day. You can see for miles, but at night, it's like looking into an endless black ocean with no shore in sight. I do my routine check first, scanning the area with my binoculars. It's my job to keep an eye out for any signs of fire or danger. Usually I don't see much at night, just the faint outline of trees and maybe the distant shimmer of the lake. But tonight, something feels different. I can't shake this uneasy feeling. Just as I'm about to sit down with my coffee, I catch a glimpse of something on the ridge. At first, I think I'm seeing things, but when I focus the binoculars, I know it's real. There, on the far edge of the ridge, is a figure. A small one, like a kid. They're wearing what looks like a ghost costume, you know, the kind with the white sheet and the dark holes for eyes. But it's June. Who wears a costume in June? A chill runs down my spine. I blink, thinking maybe it's just my eyes playing tricks. But the figure is still there, standing, perfectly still, staring, or at least it feels like it's staring right at me. I grab the radio. Dan, you there? I ask, my voice shaking a little. Dan is the only other person out here tonight at a nearby station. He answers, laughing. What's up? You sound spooked. I see something weird on the ridge. Like a kid in a costume. Dan chuckles. You're seeing ghosts, man. I'll check it out. I keep my eyes glued to the ridge as Dan's flashlight flickers in the distance, getting closer to where I saw the figure. I wait, my heart pounding. I sit in my chair, gripping the radio tightly, my eyes never leaving the ridge. The flashlight beam from Dan's lantern bounces as he walks closer to the spot where I saw the kid. My heart races, my stomach twists. This doesn't feel right. It's too quiet out here. No wind, no crickets, not even the usual rustling of the trees. Just this thick, unsettling silence hanging over everything. I keep replaying what I saw in my head. It wasn't just the figure that was strange, it was how still it was. Too still. And the way the ghostly sheet hung over the small body gave it a creepy, unnatural look. I watch as Dan's flashlight gets closer and closer to the ridge. Any second now, he'll reach it. And then We'll figure out what's going on. Maybe it's just some prank, some kid sneaking out for a scare. Yeah, that has to be it. Kids do dumb stuff all the time. Dan, you getting close? I ask, my voice breaking the heavy silence. I try to sound calm, but I can't hide the nerves creeping in. Almost there, he answers through the radio. His voice sounds normal, like this is no big deal. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe it really is nothing. Then suddenly, Dan's flashlight flickers. It sputters once, twice, and then it dies completely. The light goes out, and Dan disappears in the darkness. I lean forward, pressing the radio to my mouth. Dan, you there? My voice comes out shakier than I wanted it to. No answer. Dan! I shout into the radio, the tension building in my chest. I scan the ridge, but now it's just black. No light. No movement. Nothing. My hand tightens around the binoculars as I sweep them over the spot where I last saw him. The eerie stillness is suffocating. The wind should be blowing by now. The trees should be swaying, but everything feels frozen in place. Then, just when I think it can't get any worse, the forest itself seems to react. The quiet becomes louder, if that even makes sense. The absence of sound presses against my ears. It's like the whole forest is holding its breath. Waiting. I try the radio again. Dan, come on, man. Quit messing around. Still nothing. A sick feeling starts crawling up my spine. Something is wrong. Really wrong. I reach for my flashlight and shine it out over the trees, sweeping it back and forth across the ridge. But as soon as the beam hits the spot where the kid had been standing, I stop. Dead. There's nothing there. The figure, the kid, the ghost. Whatever it was, it's gone. My breath catches in my throat. I should feel relieved that it's not there anymore. But instead, it feels worse. My mind races. Did the kid run off? Was this all some weird prank? Or was it something else? I start pacing inside the small room, trying to think, trying to figure out what to do. Every second that Dan doesn't respond feels like a weight pressing down on me. What if something happened to him? What if... Suddenly, a new thought hits me, sending a wave of cold fear through my body. What if that figure I saw wasn't a kid at all? What if it was something else entirely? I grabbed the radio one last time, my voice shaking. Dan, please answer. This isn't funny anymore. But all I hear is the static of dead air. I stand frozen in the tower, staring out into the pitch-black forest. The radio is still in my hand, but I've stopped trying to call Dan. There's only silence on the other end, like the whole world has gone quiet just to mess with me. My heart pounds so hard I can feel it in my throat. I shine my flashlight down toward the forest below, hoping, praying, to catch some sign of Dan. Anything. His flashlight flickering back on, his voice calling out to me, but nothing. The beam of light just cuts through the thick darkness, barely making a dent in the inky black. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I see movement. At first, I think I'm imagining it. I sweep the flashlight back and forth across the base of the tower, searching for what I saw. That's when I spot it. Something, or someone, is moving through the trees. It's slow at first, a shadow gliding between the trunks. I narrow my eyes and aim the light directly at it. My hands start to tremble. A figure steps into view and my stomach drops. It's not Dan. It's not even close to Dan. It's a woman. At least, I think it's a woman. Her body is all wrong, tall and thin, so thin that her skin looks like it's stretched over her bones, and she's soaking wet. Her eyes glow yellow, and her clothes cling to her in a way that makes my skin crawl. Her skin looks decayed, like she's been dead for days, but it's her eyes that make my blood run cold. They're wide, too wide and pure yellow. No pupils, just this blank, terrifying stare. Her mouth hangs open in an unnatural way, like she's about to scream, but no sound comes out. For a second, I can't move. I'm locked in place, staring down at her, trying to make sense of what I'm seeing. This can't be real. It just can't. But then, she starts moving. Fast, too fast. She's at the base of the tower now, looking up at me with that awful blank stare. And then, without warning, she starts to climb. I snap out of my daze, my heart hammering in my chest. She's coming up the stairs. Too fast. Way too fast for something that should even be alive. I slam the door to the cabin shut and lock it. my hands shaking so badly I can barely turn the latch. Footsteps echo up the stairs, heavy and fast, like she's sprinting. My brain races, trying to figure out what to do. There's no way out. I'm trapped up here. I grab a knife from the kitchen drawer, gripping it so tightly my knuckles turn white. I back away from the door, my eyes glued to it. I can hear her getting closer, until her footsteps stop, right outside the door. I hold my breath, praying she'll go away. But then the door handle rattles. She's trying to get in. Suddenly, I hear a loud thud like something slamming against the door. Then another. The door shakes in its frame, and I know it won't hold much longer. My heart races, my whole body trembling as I back into the corner of the cabin, clutching the knife like it's my only lifeline. Then I hear it. A faint, wet, dripping sound. Behind me. I turn slowly, my flashlight beam shaking as it moves across the room. The supply cabinet. The door is wide open, and standing in front of it, grinning through the same dark-eyed sheet I saw earlier, is the child. I can't breathe. My heart feels like it's going to explode out of my chest as I stare at the child standing by the open supply cabinet, the same small figure I saw on the ridge, still draped in that ghostly white sheet with the dark holes for eyes. Except now, it's standing inside my tower. My hands shake as I grip the knife tighter, trying to make sense of what I'm seeing. This can't be happening. How did they get inside? How did they climb the tower so fast? The woman, she's still outside, isn't she? The child tilts its head like it's amused by my fear, and then it starts to laugh. The sound isn't right. It's high-pitched and hollow, echoing off the walls of the tiny room, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I take a step back, my legs shaking so badly I nearly fall over. Before I can think, I lunge forward and grab the sheet, yanking it off in one quick motion. The breath catches in my throat. Standing beneath the sheet is Dan's son, just grinning up at me with wide eyes and holding a small walkie-talkie in his hand. What is this? I stammer, trying to make sense of it all. Dan's kid. This was all a joke? The boy's grin only widens. Gotcha, he says, his voice full of laughter. Dad said you'd be scared. For a split second, relief floods through me. My knees feel weak, and I almost laugh myself. Of course, it was just a prank, a stupid, elaborate prank set up by Dan and his kid to mess with me. I should have known. But then, something in my gut twists. The woman at the base of the tower, she wasn't part of this. I glance toward the door, my mind racing. Dan, I say into the radio, my voice shaky. You're telling me this whole thing was just a prank? The kid in the sheet? The whole setup? Dan's voice crackles back through the radio, still laughing. Yep. My son and I thought we'd give you a good scare. We even rigged the flashlight to die at just the right time. Pretty good, huh? I feel a surge of anger rise in my chest. Pretty good? You nearly gave me a heart attack. But I hesitate. My mouth goes dry. What about the woman? The line goes silent for a moment. What woman? Dan finally replies, his voice serious now. What are you talking about? I swallow hard. The woman. The one at the bottom of the tower, with yellow eyes, pale, climbing the stairs. That wasn't part of the joke? There's a pause. A long, terrible pause. When Dan speaks again, his voice is low and frightened. That wasn't us. A cold wave of terror washes over me. My pulse pounds in my ears as I turn back to the window, and that's when I see her. She's back. Standing at the base of the tower, looking up at me with those wide, vacant eyes, and that same twisted, unnatural grin. Her dark hair clings to her face as blood drips from her clothes, pooling on the steps below. But this time, she doesn't start climbing. She just stands there, staring, waiting. My breath comes in ragged gasps, and I can't tear my eyes away from her. My hand grips the knife so tight it hurts. But I know it won't help. I hear Dan shouting through the radio, but I don't answer. I can't. I'm frozen. And then the woman takes one slow, deliberate step toward the tower, and I know, deep down, I won't survive the night. I used to think the canyon only held echoes of wind and water, that the sounds that bounced between those high red walls were nothing more than nature playing with its own voice. But I know now, some echoes don't belong to nature. Some belong to something older, patient, and listening. My name isn't important anymore, but I was a ranger once, a good one. I knew the desert trails like the back of my hand, the canyons that wound through sandstone veins, the smell of sage after rain, the way the sky dimmed to violet before night swallowed it whole. I was stationed in southern Utah, near a place most tourists never find, Echo Ridge, a narrow maze of red rock cut deep by centuries of wind and silence. Back then, I believed every sound in those canyons had a reason. A coyote, a shifting rock, the distant snap of a twig. Logic was my shield. I'd tell nervous hikers that their minds were simply amplifying the wilderness, that the canyon wasn't whispering to them. It was only repeating what they'd already said. But the first time I heard my name come back, I hadn't spoken at all. It was a Thursday evening. The last campers had checked out hours before sunset, and I was hiking the lower rim to make sure no one had stayed past curfew. The sun was bleeding into the cliffs, setting the world on fire in shades of rust and gold. My boots crunched against the gravel path, and somewhere behind me, the wind rose. I stopped, turning toward it. The canyon answered with my name. It wasn't loud, not a shout or a whisper, just a voice caught mid-breath, half swallowed by distance. The sound drifted through the rock as if the canyon itself had shaped it from air. For a second, I laughed under my breath. Sound carries weird in the desert. I called out, testing it. "Who's there?" No response. The only movement was a hawk circling high above, wings cutting the last threads of light. I told myself it was just the echo of my own breath, carried strangely. But that night, back at the station, I couldn't shake it. I replayed it in my head over and over, how the tone had matched my own name perfectly. The slight rasp, the pause between syllables. The next morning, I mentioned it to Frank, one of the older rangers. He laughed, shaking his head. "Echo Ridge has a way of talking back," he said. "Locals say it remembers voices. That's why the tribes used to call it the throat of the gods. If you speak too loud in there, it might start to speak on its own." I smiled politely, the way you do when someone shares a ghost story they half believe. But I couldn't ignore the way his eyes avoided mine as he said it. That weekend, a small group of campers went missing near the North Rim. A father, mother, and their teenage son. They'd left their van parked by the ranger lot, keys still in the ignition. No footprints leading away, no sign of struggle. Just 3 sleeping bags laid out by the fire pit and food half prepared. The boy's camera was found by a boulder, its last photo blurry, all motion and red dust. We combed the area for 3 days. Drones, dogs, search teams, nothing. On the 4th day, I volunteered to check a side gorge that branched off from the main canyon. It was narrow, barely wide enough for a man to walk upright, and wound down into shadow. My flashlight beam caught carvings on the walls, symbols that looked like spirals, eyes, hands pressed into the stone. Old petroglyphs, maybe. The air felt heavier down there, almost damp. I stopped to rest, took a sip of warm water. Then I heard it again. My name. This time it wasn't distant. It was right there in the dark. I froze. The sound had depth now, like a person standing just out of sight. I swung the flashlight toward the walls, and the beam caught movement, a ripple along the rock as if the stone itself had inhaled. My chest tightened. I wanted to speak, to call out again, but my throat wouldn't obey. It wasn't just hearing my name. It was hearing it the way my mother used to say it years ago when she was still alive. The tone, the inflection, everything. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. The beam flickered, then steadied, revealing nothing but stone. My own breathing echoed back, harsh and ragged. I climbed out of the gorge faster than I should have, scraping my hands raw on the rock. When I emerged into sunlight, I felt like I'd broken the surface after being underwater too long. Back at the station, I filed the report, left out the voice. I told myself it was stress, dehydration, maybe even the heat messing with my perception. But that night, lying in my cabin, I heard a sound outside. 3 soft knocks on the door. Not random, measured, patient. I sat up, reaching for my flashlight. "Frank?" I called. No answer. The knocks came again. I opened the door. The porch was empty, but there were footprints in the dust, barefoot, leading away toward the canyon. I didn't follow. Not that night. The next morning, Frank didn't show up for his patrol. His truck was still parked outside his cabin, keys on the table, boots by the door. Inside, there was a half-finished mug of coffee, still warm. We searched for him too, and as I walked the rim again, I realized something. The footprints I'd seen outside my cabin matched the ones near the missing family's camp. Same arch, same depth, and all of them ended at the edge of Echo Ridge. By then, I'd stopped believing in coincidences. That evening, I returned to the gorge alone, against every rule, against every shred of logic I'd ever relied on. I told myself it was duty, that I had to find answers. But deep down, I think I needed to face whatever it was that called my name. The canyon was quiet. The air had that electric stillness before a storm. I climbed down the same path, flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. The spirals on the walls seemed deeper now, cut into the rock rather than drawn. I reached the spot where I'd heard my name before and whispered, "I'm here." The canyon exhaled. The wind rose from below, carrying voices, soft, overlapping, hundreds of them, all whispering fragments of words I couldn't understand. My name surfaced among them like a ripple. Then again, louder, urgent. The beam of my flashlight caught movement ahead, a faint shimmer in the darkness like heat distortion. A shape began to form, humanoid but translucent, as if made from dust and air. It tilted its head, the outline flickering with every heartbeat of light. Then it spoke. And the voice that came out wasn't mine. It wasn't human at all. It was a layered sound, like multiple people speaking at once through the walls, through the stone. Each word dragged like it had to climb through a mile of earth to reach me. It said my name, and then, "Why did you call?" I couldn't breathe. I hadn't called. Not then. But something deep inside me knew. It'd been waiting for someone who would listen long enough. Someone who believed sound was just an echo, not a memory. I stumbled backward, fell hard against the canyon wall. The rock felt warm beneath my hands, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. And then the ground opened. A crack split beneath me, just wide enough for air to rise through it. Cold, damp, and carrying the faint smell of rot. From that crack came a whisper, not from above or around, but from below. The flashlight fell. The beam spun, lighting up the carvings around me. Spirals, eyes, hands, each now looked like open mouths. I heard the whisper again, closer, almost brushing my ear. This time it didn't say my name. It said, "Come back." I scrambled out of that gorge like a wounded animal, scraping my palms raw against the stone. The canyon floor rose and fell beneath me, my own breathing chasing itself through the walls in ragged echoes. The voice still clung to my ears, those two words, "Come back," like something whispered into my skull rather than the air. By the time I reached the rim, the desert had gone completely silent. No crickets, no wind, not even the faint hum of the ranger station generator a mile away. Just that bone-deep quiet that doesn't feel empty, only waiting. When I looked back down into the canyon, the darkness didn't seem flat anymore. It had depth, like the mouth of something vast, patient, and hungry. I didn't tell anyone about what I saw that night. I couldn't. Who would believe that the earth spoke, that the canyon itself had a memory of voices it refused to let go? But something changed in me after that. Every sound became suspect. The creak of my cabin floorboards, the murmur of the wind through juniper branches, even my own footsteps on gravel, they all seemed familiar. Not like I'd heard them before, but like they had heard me. I started sleeping less, eating less. My logbooks filled with half-finished reports and notes written in my own shorthand that I didn't remember writing. And sometimes, when I looked up from my desk late at night, I'd swear I could hear movement on the porch, the soft crunch of dust under bare feet. On the 7th night after Frank disappeared, I heard the radio crackle. It was close to midnight. I'd left it on channel 1, the Ranger frequency. The static was faint at first, then sharpened into a thin, rhythmic pulse. 3 short bursts, a pause, then one long. Again and again. It wasn't a call sign. Not any I knew. I picked up the mic. Station 2 responding, identify. The static stopped. Then through the silence a voice. Come back. The exact same tone, the same cadence. My throat went dry. Who is this? I asked. Nothing. Then another voice, clearer this time, older, weary, familiar. It's Frank. I froze. My hand clenched the mic. Frank, where the hell are you? Down where the light bends, he said. You have to come see. It's not what you think. And then the channel went dead. I spent the next hour convincing myself it was interference. Maybe a prank transmission bouncing from a nearby town. But when I checked the radio log, there were no other active rangers within 50 miles. At dawn, I packed a flashlight, extra batteries, and a rope. I told myself I was just going to check the gorge again, to verify. But deep down, I already knew I was going back because it wanted me to. The desert morning was cold enough that my breath came out in small ghosts. The sun was still low, cutting sharp shadows across the rocks. I followed the narrow trail down to the gorge entrance. The air grew cooler the deeper I went, until it smelled faintly of wet stone and metal. When I reached the spot where the crack had opened before, the ground was smooth again, as if it had never split at all. But the spirals on the walls looked fresher now, like they'd been carved only hours ago. I turned off my flashlight for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. And in that thin darkness, I heard it again, my name, drawn out in a slow exhale. Frank, I called, my voice unsteady. There was movement ahead, the sound of pebbles scattering. Then a shape stepped into view. A man, or the shadow of one, framed by the narrow walls of the gorge. His clothes were the same ranger uniform we all wore, but the colors were wrong, faded too much, as if bleached by time. Frank, I whispered. He didn't answer, just stood there, head tilted slightly like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. When I took a step forward, he mirrored it exactly. One step, same rhythm. That's when I noticed his face. It wasn't right. The features were soft, blurred, like the canyon hadn't finished shaping him yet. Frank, I tried again. You need help. We've been looking for you. He raised a hand and pressed a finger to his lips. The gesture was wrong, too smooth, too rehearsed. Then he turned and started walking deeper into the gorge. I followed. Against every rule of survival, I followed. The path narrowed until the walls brushed my shoulders. The air turned thick, humming faintly with vibration. The deeper I went, the more the stone began to glow, subtle veins of blue light running through the rock like frozen lightning. Frank stopped at a bend. He turned to me, and for the first time he spoke clearly. Do you hear them yet? Hear who? I asked. He smiled, but it wasn't human. The ones who remember. The canyon groaned around us. The sound wasn't from above or below, it came from within. The rock itself seemed to breathe, exhaling warm air that smelled of rust and old water. The blue veins brightened, pulsing like veins under skin. Frank stepped closer until his face was only a foot from mine. His eyes, if they were eyes, reflected the glow. It's not an echo, he whispered. It's what comes before the sound. Then he was gone. Not vanished, just absorbed. The walls swallowed him soundlessly, leaving only the faint outline of a handprint pressed into the stone. I stumbled backward, slamming my shoulder against the opposite wall. My flashlight flickered, then burst to life, flooding the gorge with light. The carvings glistened like wet clay, and beneath my boots, the ground began to hum. At first, it was faint, just a tremor, then stronger, vibrating through my bones. From the depths below, something was moving, rising. I turned and ran. The canyon seemed to twist in on itself, every turn I took leading me back to the same spot, the same handprint on the wall, the same faint hum. My lungs burned, the air heavy with dust. And then, for the third time, it spoke my name. But this time, it wasn't coming from the canyon walls. It was behind me. I spun around. The flashlight beam caught a reflection. A face in the dark. My face. It was smiling. I froze, staring at that reflection. No, that thing. Wearing my face. The air around it rippled like heat haze, blurring the line between what was solid and what was only light, pretending to be real. My own grin stared back at me, wrong in every small way, the corners of the mouth curled too long, the eyes too wide, the head tilted with an almost curious tremor, like it was testing how much of me it could imitate before I'd break. My flashlight began to dim, flickering with every breath I took. I could hear my own heartbeat, heavy and wet inside my ears. The echo of my voice, "Who's there?" returned to me from the canyon walls, though I hadn't spoken. It repeated again, softer than again, until it became a whispering loop of myself, talking to myself in a growing crowd of voices. That's when I realized what I was hearing wasn't an echo at all. It was every sound that had ever been heard here, recorded by the rock like grooves on a vinyl. Every ranger who'd shouted, every lost hiker who'd screamed, every name ever spoken into the gorge. The canyon wasn't reflecting, it was collecting. And it had collected me. The version of me standing there smiled wider. "You heard them too," it said, but the lips didn't move right. Each word came a fraction late, like the sound had to crawl out from behind the face. I stumbled backward, my flashlight beam shaking wildly across the walls. Every surface I illuminated was covered in markings now, faces etched in red dust, hundreds of them, mouths open, all shaped mid-scream. The canyon moaned deep and long, like thunder rolling through bone. That other me tilted its head again. "You left them down there," it said, voice overlapping itself. "You left me down there." I turned and ran. I didn't care where the path led, up, down, sideways. I just ran until the light thinned and the air turned sharp again. My knees scraped against rock, my hands split open, and somewhere behind me, my own footsteps followed, half a beat late. When I finally reached the surface, the morning light hit me like a blade. I didn't stop running until the station was in sight, but when I reached my cabin, there was smoke curling from the chimney. I hadn't lit a fire. I opened the door slowly. Inside, the air was thick with heat. The stove glowed faintly red, and something was cooking on it. 3 tin mugs lined up neatly, steam rising from each one. Coffee. The smell filled the cabin with a nauseating comfort, thick and wrong. And there, sitting in my chair, was me. He had my uniform on, the same tear on the sleeve, the same ranger badge glinting in the morning sun through the window. He looked up as I entered, smiled the same polite, tired smile I'd practiced for years greeting tourists. "Rough morning?" he asked, gesturing to the coffee. My chest tightened. "What are you?" He leaned forward, hands clasped. "You called me." "No." "Yes," he said simply, like stating the weather. "You spoke to the canyon. You listened when it whispered. You gave it a name, and now it gave one back." I backed toward the door, fingers brushing the handle, but it felt hot, too hot to grip. The other me stood. "You shouldn't fight it. The canyon remembers better than you do." My ears rang, pressure building behind my eyes. I could still hear the faint hum of the gorge, even this far from it, like the sound had followed me home. The voice continued, calm and steady, like it was explaining something obvious. "When a voice enters those walls, it doesn't fade, it stays. Every word, every breath. They live there, they build there. You and I, we're just layers of sound stacked too long in the same place." He stepped closer. The heat in the room rose, sweat stinging my eyes. My flashlight still hung from my belt. I grabbed it, flicked it on, and shone it straight into his face. He didn't flinch, but where the beam hit his skin, light didn't reflect. It sank into him, like shining a torch into deep water. His outline wavered, flickering like mist. "You think light saves you?" he asked, his voice splitting into 2 tones now, one low and human, the other airy, dragging behind like an echo in reverse. "You think you can leave what you've already become?" Something in me snapped. I lunged for the door, kicked it open despite the heat burning my palm, and stumbled out into the cold air. The morning sky was bright and painfully blue, and for a moment I thought I'd escaped. But then I heard it. The sound of footsteps behind me, not chasing, just matching. Every move I made, it mirrored. I turned left, it turned left. I stopped, it stopped. The only difference was the delay, the half-beat that separated me from it. I broke into a sprint, running down the path toward the edge of Echo Ridge. The wind howled through the cliffs, carrying my breath away. And as I reached the rim, I looked down. The canyon floor shimmered faintly, like a heat mirage. In that light, I saw shapes, hundreds of them, figures moving just beneath the surface of the stone, pale and fluid like shadows trapped under glass. and above them the faintest whisper rose, not from one mouth, but from all of them together. My name. Over and over. I dropped to my knees. The wind whipped dust into my eyes. The sun hung low and cruel, washing the cliffs in gold that looked like fire. Behind me, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I didn't turn. I told you, it said. You heard them too. The hand tightened, its grip too strong to be mine, and then nothing. No sound, no breath. The entire canyon held its air like the world itself had stopped breathing. When I finally looked back, I was alone. The second coffee mug on my cabin table had gone cold by the time I got back. For the next week, I didn't leave the station. I filed no reports. I barely slept. Every night, I heard the whisper in my dreams, first faint, then louder, until it became the rhythm of my pulse. Come back, come back, come back. I lasted 9 days. On the 10th, I packed a single flashlight and drove to the rim before dawn. There are some things you don't outrun. You only circle back to them, like the canyon's voice circling itself through stone. I stood at the edge and whispered into the dark, I'm here. The echo came back exactly once. My voice, quiet and hollow. And then after a pause, another, softer, deeper, older. Welcome back. The air trembled when that second voice answered. It wasn't sound, it was pressure. A low pulse that made the hairs on my arms rise as if the canyon had lungs and I was standing inside them. My flashlight beam danced across the red stone, catching glimmers of moisture in the cracks. The light reflected faintly, like eyes opening just beneath the surface. I took a single step forward. The ground seemed to hum underfoot, alive with a heartbeat I couldn't tell was mine or the canyon's. Every echo of my movement came back too fast, overlapping, building into a rhythm that made my chest tighten. I should have turned back, but curiosity and fear were tangled now. I had to know what was waiting down there. So I climbed down again. The entrance looked the same, jagged sandstone walls pressed close, air cool and metallic, but something in it felt older, more aware. Every sound I made had weight. I whispered a single word, Frank, and the canyon whispered it back immediately, only the voice wasn't mine anymore. It was deeper, like someone dragging their throat across the stone to speak. Halfway down, I saw it, my old rope from the search, still anchored into the rock. But the end didn't hang free. It vanished into the crack that had opened days before. That impossible fissure that had sealed itself now gaped wide again, yawning like a mouth. I hesitated. The air coming out of it was warm and wet, carrying the faint smell of copper and earth. Beneath that, though, something else, like the scent of rain on bone. I crouched near the opening and shone my light inside. The beam didn't reach the bottom, just swirled in a mist that caught dust like glitter, each particle moving on its own, not drifting but circling. Then, movement. A shape deep below, too large to name. My heart hammered. Frank? The voice that came back wasn't human. It came in chords, like dozens of mouths speaking at once through one throat. You're already down here. I stumbled backward, but my boot caught the edge. I dropped the flashlight. It tumbled into the crack, spinning light against the walls as it fell. The glow faded, swallowed whole, and the darkness that followed felt solid, absolute. When the echo of the fall ended, something else started. A slow knock, 3 times, deliberate. It came from beneath me. I dropped to my knees, palms on the rock. It was warm. Then, through that warmth, a pulse beat against my skin. It wasn't mine. And just like before, I heard my name. Not from one direction. From everywhere. I don't remember deciding to crawl into that fissure, but I did. The rock scraped my shoulders, tore my uniform sleeves. The space narrowed until I could barely breathe. Then it opened again. Suddenly. A hollow chamber carved smooth by something older than water. At the center stood a pool of black water, still as glass. My flashlight lay half submerged in it, its beam faint but steady. I knelt beside it, and in the light's reflection I saw faces beneath the surface, hundreds layered on top of each other. Each one looked like someone I knew. Frank, the missing family, even myself. They floated without moving, eyes open, mouths closed. As I watched, the surface rippled. One by one, the mouths opened. I scrambled back, hands slipping on wet rock. The air filled with a low vibration, like wind trying to form words. The reflections of the faces stretched and twisted. I realized what I was seeing weren't bodies at all. They were impressions, burned into the water like memory, voices made visible. And then the pool began to speak, not with words, with sound. Every echo I had ever heard in that canyon, every scream, every name, rising all at once, deafening, chaotic. The walls pulsed with light from the veins in the stone, had blue turning white. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the sound was inside my skull now, vibrating bone and thought alike. Through the noise, one voice grew louder, familiar, mine. It said, "You came back." Then another joined it, Frank's, and then more, until there was a chorus. "Come back, come back, come back." I tried to crawl away, but the floor moved under me like muscle. The canyon was breathing faster, drawing me toward the pool. The air turned heavy with heat. My chest ached. My vision blurred. The light from the walls grew brighter still, until the whole cavern glowed like the inside of a body. Then, silence. Absolute crushing silence. The pool went dark. The glow faded. And in the reflection where my face should have been, another looked back, older, thinner, eyes hollowed out by shadow. It blinked once, then spoke my name. Not as an echo. Not even as a memory. It was me. My throat locked. I wanted to deny it, to tell myself this was a hallucination, but the reflection moved independently, slowly raising its hand toward me. The surface of the water rippled upward, stretching like skin. I turned and ran, blind, feeling my way along the wall. I scraped my fingers raw, followed the faint current of air until I saw light, sunlight, streaming faintly through the fissure above. I climbed, gasping, tearing my nails bloody on the rock, until I spilled out onto the rim, coughing dust into daylight. I lay there for a long time. The world was still. The sky, so blue it almost hurt, looked empty, indifferent. When I finally sat up, my radio buzzed faintly. A voice crackled through. "Station 2, report in. Copy?" It sounded like me. I stared at the radio, hand trembling. Then I switched it off. I walked back to the station that day in silence, every step echoing just a little too long behind me. The canyon lay quiet, as if satisfied. But that night, when I tried to sleep, I heard something faint under my breath when I exhaled, an almost imperceptible delay, a second breath following mine. By the end of the week, I left my post, turned in my badge, my uniform, everything. I told them I needed time off. They didn't argue. The replacement ranger asked if Echo Ridge was really as quiet as everyone said. I told him the truth. It listens more than it talks. He laughed, said that sounded poetic. But last night, months later, I woke to the sound of wind outside my apartment window. Only it wasn't wind. It was a whisper, distant but clear, moving through the brick and glass as if through stone. My name. And when I looked in the mirror this morning, I swear, just for a moment, the reflection blinked a second too late.